West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Well, the pressure is working. The pressure from Special Prosecutor Jack Smith on Donald Trump's associates and co-defendants and possible co-conspirators is working exactly as intended, which is very, very bad news for Donald Trump tonight. The star witness against Donald Trump, who we identified on this program Thursday night as Trump Employee 4, apparently flipped and decided to testify against Donald Trump after receiving a target letter from Special Prosecutor Jack Smith. Donald Trump has to be worried more than ever tonight that his associates will flip and start cooperating with Jack Smith as soon as they receive target letters from Jack Smith. Trump Employee 4 could start a stampede of Trump witnesses against Donald Trump in all of the criminal cases Donald Trump will be facing. CNN reported that Trump Employee 4, Yusil Taveras, received a target letter from Special Prosecutor Jack Smith after Donald Trump and Walt Nauta were indicted by Jack Smith in an espionage and obstruction of justice indictment. Now imagine working at Mar-a-Lago and receiving a target letter from Jack Smith after you have watched your coworker, Walt Nauta, marched into a federal courthouse in Miami as a criminal defendant with Donald Trump. As a Trump employee working at Mar-a-Lago, no matter how much you worshiped or feared Donald Trump, when you watched him get arrested that day by Jack Smith, something should have happened to your confidence in Donald Trump's ability to protect you. The superseding indictment that Jack Smith filed on Thursday, adding more criminal charges against Donald Trump for his attempts to destroy evidence in the case, tells the story of two Trump employees who made two very different decisions in dealing with Jack Smith. Yusil Taveras, who's identified in that superseding indictment only as Trump Employee 4, clearly made the decision to cooperate with Jack Smith after watching his coworker, Walt Nauta, become a co-defendant with Donald Trump. And Carlos de Oliveira apparently decided not to cooperate with Jack Smith, and that ended up being added to the indictment as a co-defendant on Thursday. Carlos de Oliveira's life changed for the worse a year and a half ago when he was promoted from valet to the head of maintenance at Donald Trump's Florida residence. And it was thanks to that promotion that Donald Trump, 6 months later, asked Carlos de Oliveira to commit a crime for him, according to the superseding indictment. after the security surveillance video at Mar-a-Lago was subpoenaed by federal prosecutors, Donald Trump told Carlos de Oliveira to delete the video. Destroying evidence in that federal prosecutors have already subpoenaed is a very clear federal crime of obstruction of justice. The superseding indictment says de Oliveira told Trump employee 4 that the boss wanted the server deleted. Trump employee 4 responded that he would not know how to do that and that he did not believe that he would have the rights to do that. De Oliveira then insisted to Trump employee 4 that the boss wanted the server deleted and asked, what are we going to do? It is very clear in that indictment that Trump employee 4, Yusil Taveras, is the prosecutor's source for that conversation. Trump employee 4 literally talked his way out of an indictment after receiving a target letter by explaining to Jack Smith exactly what was said to him and exactly what he said. And after Trump employee 4 told that story, Carlos de Oliveira got indicted. There is a way out of that indictment for Carlos de Oliveira. Only Carlos de Oliveira can tell prosecutors about the single most important conversation mentioned in the superseding indictment. The day after Donald Trump found out that federal prosecutors were getting a subpoena for the security camera footage, the indictment says on June 23rd, 2022 at 8:46 p.m., Trump called de Oliveira and they spoke for approximately 24 minutes. Co-defendant de Oliveira can walk out of this case tonight if he tells Jack Smith every word that he remembers from those 24 minutes. Carlos de Oliveira made his first trip to federal court today for a 10-minute appearance before a magistrate judge who released him on a $100,000 bond that did not actually require him to put up any money for that release. The judge gave de Oliveira the standard restrictions for defendants in the Southern District of Florida to not speak to any witnesses in the case and to not leave the Southern District of Florida, conditions that do not apply to the very favorable special treatment his co-defendant Donald Trump is getting. Trump employee 4, Yusil Taveras, watched the television coverage of his co-worker, Carlos de Oliveira, getting arrested today from the comfort of his home, presumably, knowing that he will be the star witness against Carlos de Oliveira, Walt Nauta, and Donald Trump, the only possible witness in the case, based on the evidence that we now know, who could give even more devastating testimony than Trump employee 4 is Carlos de Oliveira, if he chooses to tell the truth about those 24 minutes on the phone with Donald Trump, the phone call during which prosecutors believe Carlos de Oliveira chose to join a criminal conspiracy with Donald Trump. Carlos de Oliveira showed up in court today with a lawyer paid for by Donald Trump. The first possible external sign that Carlos de Oliveira changes his mind about which side he's on would be changing lawyers. That's what Trump employee 4, Yusil Taveras, did before he decided to speak with Jack Smith's investigators. He got a target letter after watching Donald Trump and Walt Nauta march into court to get arrested, and the very first thing he did was change lawyers. Yusil Taveras dumped the lawyer Donald Trump was paying for, got another lawyer, and then apparently cooperated with Jack Smith. And when the next indictment came out, Yusil Taveras was not a co-defendant, but his story was told in full in the new indictment, a story that prosecutors could only get from him, their current star witness, Trump employee 4. Carlos de Oliveira is 56 years old. With good health, he has at least 30 years of an active life ahead of him. He has to ask himself tonight, how many of those years is he prepared to spend in federal prison for Donald Trump? He has to ask himself tonight, will 77-year-old Donald Trump take care of him financially for the next 30 years? Will Donald Trump's children continue to financially support him after Donald Trump is gone? And Donald Trump has to ask himself tonight, how long can he count on Carlos de Oliveira when Trump employee 4, Yusil Tavares, has already shown Carlos de Oliveira and all other Trump employees the safest way to react to a target letter from Jack Smith? Carlos de Oliveira came to this country from Portugal. He has worked at Mar-a-Lago for approximately 20 years. CNN is reporting that members of his family, quote, couldn't even sleep last night with all that's going on. De Oliveira's family was pretty certain that he did not realize the consequences of what Trump was telling him to do when he asked him to delete the security footage, and that given his lack of money, de Oliveira was probably just doing anything that Trump told him to do. He isn't familiar with how the government here works, and he was probably just being loyal to his boss who was paying his bills, the person told CNN. The family feels like he got trapped. Trump employee 4, Yusil Tavares, has shown Carlos de Oliveira the way out of that trap. Get rid of the Trump lawyer and tell Jack Smith all about that 24-minute phone call with criminal defendant Donald Trump.
It is Tuesday, the 1st of August of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has. And it always will. Yes. Alrighty. Well, how do we begin today? Quite a day, isn't it? Yes, it is Tuesday, and there's plenty in store for us. I had a little bit of a problem with the mic and the port in the PC in which I run the mic through. So hopefully we'll stay connected and continue. But I just wanted to mention a little bit about Joe Biden taking phone calls from his son like that's supposed to be a bad thing. Yep, the whole GOP is up in arms because apparently during the hearing, Archer testified that Joe Biden took phone calls from Hunter. No business was spoken about, and there was no bribe, but the GOP says there's something nefarious going on there. Daniel Goldman has insisted that the transcript of the hearing be released. He was the only one who stayed for the whole hearing, by the way. But Comer doesn't seem to want to do that because that means he can't go on Fox and Newsmax and elsewhere to lie. And that the GOP could continue to lie repeatedly on social media. Now, we know that Donald Trump hates his kids. We know that. So no wonder they would consider there's something nefarious going on that Joe Biden would actually take a phone call from his only surviving son. Yet Byron Donalds, down there in Florida, ghosting his adult kids or older sons when they call him. He said sometimes 4 or 6 hours, maybe I never get back to them. I'm a busy man. So he knows corruption when he sees it, he says. And I'll tell you why he knows corruption when he sees it. Because he got convicted of campaign finance, fraud, embezzlement, and other financial crimes. Which is another part of their problem because they think since they are crooks, everybody else is a crook except worse than they are. That's what we have to fight against. A Byron Donalds who won't return his kids' calls, won't take his adult kids' calls. What kind of father does that? I'll tell you who. The angry man. The angry dad. Yeah. Good daddy or bad daddy showing up after work? We don't know. We'll have to find out. All right. Well, that is the whole Republican brand, isn't it? Anger. All right. Well, we could go on, but we do have quite a curated show for you today. So why don't we give you a rundown on what we have in store for this fabulous Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays as we begin in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Yes, at the top, Lawrence was breaking down how co-defendant Carlos de la Vera could save himself by telling Jack Smith about that 24-minute phone call with criminal defendant Donald Trump. On the rest of the menu, citing the separation of church and state, a group of parents, clergy, and education activists in Oklahoma filed a lawsuit to halt the opening of the nation's first religious charter school. Texas extremist foot soldiers became federal judges under Trump, securing a conservative stronghold in America's courts. And we are reaping the benefits of that, aren't we? Benefits. And monsoon rains in Phoenix ended a 31-day streak of highs at or above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Just don't call it climate change or global warming. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where 4 separatist Bosnian Serb leaders are sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury for undermining the 1995 peace accords. And Kosovo's journalists protested against the government's decision to suspend a private television station's operations. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. To the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across to the left from that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, and down just a skosh is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could possibly send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, thereby buying us a coffee once a month, it really does help us pay our bills and all the other costs that are ever increasing. And I gotta confess, we actually need the help, probably more so now than in the recent past, and we've made these pleas before. But we do have quite a few large outlays of money to lay out here in the next month and the month after this. So thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Mastodon, Spoutable, and we'll figure out maybe Blue Sky and elsewhere. We're bugging out of Twitter, okay? Netroots Radio doesn't want Elon Musk to use any of what we have posted to train his artificial intelligence. We're not going to be a part of it. I'm going to stick around probably till the bitter end, because that's the way I am. But you can find Netroots Radio right now on Mastodon and Spoutable, and also over on Facebook. And Tom takes care of those, so thank you, Tom. If you would like to follow me on Twitter while I'm still there, on Mastodon, Spoutable, and Blue Sky, you can follow me on those at Justice Putnam. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes 10 minutes before showtime. And you can find those show notes and links through my social media feed. So do it. Do it. Follow the show on Twitter. It's a placemat. I'm going to get us set up over on Mastodon and the other platforms. But you can find us on Twitter currently at Cookbook West. And please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeart, YouTube, etc., etc., etc. Just not Stitcher anymore. Because SiriusXM, well, you know what I think about SiriusXM. Okay. This first offering here, I guess I better get it brought up here. Where's the tab? There it is. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Mariah Ballinget from the Washington Post. A group of parents, clergy, and education activists in Oklahoma have filed a lawsuit asking a state court to block the opening of St. Isidora of Seville Catholic Virtual School, which could become the nation's first religious charter school. The group claims that St. Isidora's will discriminate if it becomes operational and that it violates the state constitution and state law, which requires that charter schools be non-sectarian in their programs, admission policies, employment practices, and all other operations. The state's virtual charter board approved the school in June, and it is scheduled to open in the fall of 2024. Attorneys for Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the American Civil Liberties Union, Education Law Center, and Freedom from Religion Foundation are representing the group. In the lawsuit, they wrote that St. Isidora will provide a religious education and indoctrinate its students in Catholic religious beliefs. Indeed, St. Isidora's application states that the school, quote, participates in the evangelizing mission of the church, end quote, the attorney wrote. Critics say the school marks a dangerous breach in the separation of church and state. They worry it will open the door for more publicly funded charter schools that could be free to promote religion and flout civil rights law. St. Isidora's backers expected it would invite litigation. They are eager to test the question of whether charter schools are bound by the same rules as public schools and whether they are truly public schools at all. Well, you got a MAGA court full of Opus Dei Catholics. Yep. And even have an avowed handmaid sitting in judgment on the rest of us. Eleanor Klibanoff of the Texas Tribune brings us this next offering here, the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. For decades, an increasingly powerful movement of conservative lawyers, born from the Texas office of the Attorney General, has been shouldering its way into the federal judiciary, filing lawsuit after lawsuit in an attempt to slowly reshape the nation's jurisprudence to his liking. The election of Trump swung the doors wide open and ushered them inside. Trump entered office with more judicial vacancies than almost any president in U.S. history, and a resolute commitment to fill those openings with conservative loyalists. Texas, though a workhorse of the movement, was rewarded especially richly, with more new federal district and appellate judges appointed than any other state. Many of these new appointees shared a strikingly similar professional background. The number of alums from the Texas office of the Solicitor General who now wear robes on a daily basis, and not just because they have curious sartorial decisions, is an amazing and impressive thing, said Senator Ted Cruz, a former Texas Solicitor General himself, at a Federalist Society event in 2019. The progeny of Texas's conservative legal revolution no longer just bring their legal theories before the federal bench. Now they're sitting on it, ready to decide cases built on the same legal arguments they helped shape over the last 2 decades. They're young, they're smart, they're principled, they're constitutionalists, Cruz said. That is an incredible legacy, and it's a legacy Texas is going to be benefiting from 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. When President Obama left office, about half of Texas's 52 federal judgeships were filled by Republican appointees. About a third were Democratic appointees, and a full 20% were vacant, having languished under a Democratic president who this reporter says did not prioritize judicial nominees. I would say he was blocked by McConnell. And that's how that was. And then you had 2 Republican senators from Texas who did all they can to make sure they could push through their nominees. And after Trump was elected, those roadblocks swiftly resolved. Politically aligned with the president, Cruz and Senator John Cornyn basically had free rein to nominate district judges. In 2013, Democrats eliminated the 60-vote requirement for judicial appointments, so with a Republican majority in the Senate, Cruz and Cornyn did not have too much to worry about in finding consensus picks. Now, Texas nominees, whether they worked in the AG's office or not, tended to come from the same mold, active in the Federalist Society, avowed conservatives, and strong on religious liberty. In a move that would have been doomed in nomination seasons past, Cruz and Cornyn put forward 2 candidates from First Liberty, a Plano law firm that has been the tip of the spear in efforts to strike down federal and state laws seen as encroaching on religious liberty. The nomination of Jeff Mateer, who left First Liberty to work for Paxton, was scrapped after it came out he once referred to transgender children as part of Satan's plan. But Deputy General Counsel Matthew Kaczmarek made it through, becoming the first federal judge appointed directly to the bench from a religious liberty firm. And he's that guy down in Plano who's taking away women's rights. Anita Snow and Drew Costley of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A record string of daily highs over 110 degrees Fahrenheit in Phoenix ended yesterday, Monday, as the dangerous heat that suffocated the Southwest throughout July receded slightly with cooling monsoon rains. months. The historic heat began blasting the region in June, stretching from Texas across New Mexico and Arizona and into California's desert. Phoenix and its suburbs sweltered more and longer than most, with several records, including the 31 consecutive days of 110 degrees Fahrenheit plus weather. The previous record was 18 straight days, set in 1974. The streak was finally broken yesterday, Monday, when the high topped out at a chilly 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Get a sweater. All right, while we get that sweater so we can survive that cool air there in Phoenix, let us go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You were listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
So, admittedly, I'm really bad at smoking weed.
Go on.
Let's just say that at parties, I have major social anxiety when everyone's like, oh, here, smoke this. And I'm like, what is this? I'm a good Indian girl. Like, am I supposed to inhale? Am I supposed to inhale slowly? And now, of course, when you're a science journalist, everyone's like, you should know how this works, right? Like, you should absolutely understand this.
Yeah, you need to know everything about drugs. Everything about every drug and every scientific topic in general.
Exactly.
Totally. This is Tech Quickly, the tech-tastic version of Scientific American's Science Quickly podcast. I'm Sophie Bushwick, tech editor at Scientific American.
And I'm Tulika Bose, senior multimedia editor at Scientific American.
Scientists have just discovered, through the use of a smoking machine, the kind of joint that will deliver the most cannabinoid per puff.
That is wild.
I love the smoking machine. What they were using the smoking machine for was something you couldn't really use a human volunteer for without getting them inhumanly high.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they wanted to test a bunch of joints that had different, they were packed differently. And the reason they wanted to do that is because they wanted to test just how much cannabinoid do you get from a joint. It's surprisingly hard to standardize. You might have the exact same amount of leaf in each one, and it could be the same strain, so it should have the same proportion of different cannabinoids, but you don't necessarily know how much of that is getting out of the joint in gas form and into the lungs of the person smoking.
And we had a freelance science writer who covered this for us, right?
That's right. Rachel Berkowitz wrote about this for us, and she found some really interesting stuff here.
I mean, I think we should probably start first by talking a little bit about how a cannabis joint actually works, right?
Sure. Joints are a very popular method for people who are either, taking medical marijuana or recreationally smoking. And it's essentially a paper tube filled with leaf particles of different sizes, depending on how you grind it. And basically, when you light one end of it, it heats up and the leaf particles burn and they release cannabinoids. So the two most famous cannabinoids are THC, which is the intoxicating one. It's what gets people high. And then there's CBD, which is increasingly popular for medical reasons. So it's been approved for treatments of certain kinds of epilepsy. But there's also some less substantiated hype around its use in other ways, like the idea that it could help with relaxation or reduce inflammation or other things like that.
So I guess, what are we trying to measure when we measure the performance of a joint, which is hilarious and it's a very funny thing to say, right? What are we really measuring? The concentration of these aerosols collected from each inhale? Or
That's right, because the concentration of the aerosols is going to tell you how much of this intoxicating component for THC is being delivered. Or if you want to use CBD as medication, how much medication do you want per dose, so to speak? If you're a doctor and you're prescribing medical marijuana to someone, you want to make sure that they'll be able to get the same dose each time, that they can rely on that consistently, that they're not going to get, one joint that has a ton of cannabinoid released and the next one very little. That's not useful for people who want to take it for medical treatment. Or for companies that want to say, like, we can offer a standard product, they need to be able to know how much they're giving people.
I was always confused because I would hear things about strain and I would be like, okay, which cannabis strain has the highest concentration possible of THC? Like, does that matter?
Right, it does. I mean, if you've got a higher concentration of THC, you'll get higher. But it actually makes a big difference what size the particles of plant in the joint are. So the researchers, when you grind up the dried leaves of the plant, you can have it end up being different sizes. So they tested 3 different sizes, pieces that were about 1 millimeter across, 3 millimeters, and 5 millimeters.
Okay.
And then for standardization purposes, they took these pre-rolled papers and into each one they put a different particle size. So they had one joint filled with 1 millimeter pieces of leaf and one with 3 millimeter and one with 5 millimeter. And they put the same amount in each one. And they were testing 2 different strains of pot. One was primarily THC and one had primarily CBD.
So they used this machine called a smoke cycle simulator to pull smoke in for a set amount of time and then exhale it. Can you tell me more about how that works?
Basically, when a human is inhaling a joint, they're pulling air along it, and with the air, they're pulling in these aerosol particles with the cannabinoids and all the other chemicals that have been released from the burning leaf.
Right.
And with this machine, it's doing a similar pulling of air in, so it would maybe pull it in for 3 seconds and then pause, and then another 3 seconds. But you know that it's inhaling, so to speak, the same amount each time.
The machine is inhaling.
Right. The machine. It's inhaling is probably not the correct word for it, but it's pulling air in a certain way and then pushing it out a certain way.
Oh, interesting. I mean, these scientists were probably having a lot of fun.
Oh, yes. I am sure they were. They even 3D printed a mouthpiece for the smoking machine.
What? No, they didn't.
They did. And what they did was they had these filters at the mouthpiece of the machine. And they could use that to gather the cannabinoid aerosols. And so they could tell what concentration they were getting. And they measured this multiple times as the joint burned. So you could tell how much is being released at the beginning of the joint, how much in the middle, how much at the end.
So what did these scientists find?
So what they found was that the 1 millimeter particles packed the most punch. You get the most cannabinoids from the smaller size. And they think that's because the smaller size has a bigger surface area. So more of the leaf is exposed to this heat, so that allows it to burn more efficiently, but it also burns faster. So the joint that was packed with the 1 millimeter pieces was burned faster, whereas the one with the 5 millimeter pieces lasted longer. So if you're rolling something that you want to last for a longer time, maybe you want to use bigger pieces of leaf in there.
So smaller chunks of leaf, more surface area exposed to the fire, which makes them burn efficiently and faster.
Exactly.
Got it. What was your biggest takeaway from this study?
I think that what was really interesting was that the researchers, they were specifically studying the effect of the leaf size, the particle size. But what they found was that they're just scratching the surface of some of these factors that affect a joint. One of the things the scientists noticed that even though they were using these pre-rolled cones, the goal was to standardize it, right? You want to make sure that you have the same amount of leaf in each one, that it's not being affected by things like maybe you roll it slightly more thin or more thick if you're trying to hand roll something. But even controlling for as many variables as they could, there were still differences between joints that were supposed to be the same. Because there's something like humidity has an effect. The density also with which you pack the leaf, that also affects it. So there's a whole bunch of things. Joints are really hard to come to a standard about because there's all these different factors that affect how much cannabinoid concentration is being released, including how far along in the joint you are. So one thing they found was that towards the beginning of the joint, you would get the most release of something called terpenes. So terpenes are these flavor-carrying chemicals. So when you inhale, that's what you sort of taste and smell. But towards the end of the joint is when you got the highest concentration of cannabinoid.
Okay, and it's so funny because I remember people hate the end of the joint, right? The end of the joint is like the gross part.
Right. Maybe this can explain it. Maybe it's because those flavor compounds have been burnt out already. And so what you're left with is just the cannabinoids and then the burnt leaf.
Oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense.
All of these things can have an effect. And because joints are such a popular method of marijuana delivery, I think it's really interesting to kind of dig into this and what makes a difference in how high you get from a joint or how much of the cannabinoid is delivered. Science Quickly is produced by Jeff Del Vicio, Talika Bose, Kelso Harper, and Corinne Leong. Our theme music was composed by Dominic Smith.
Don't forget to subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. For more in-depth science news and features, go to scientificamerican.com. And if you like the show, give us a rating or a review.
For Scientific American Science Quickly, I'm Sophie Bushwick.
And I'm Talika Bose. See you next time.
Come to the forest. It's a place not so far away. A place where you don't have to mow the lawn or babysit. A place where you don't have to make time for free time. Where you can cool down in one of nature's swimming pools. Come meet bugs and birds. You may even meet the mysterious creature known as the other you. The silly you. The adventurous you. The curious you. Ask your parents to take you to this not-so-far-away place. Come to the forest, where the other you lives. But first, stop by discovertheforest.org, a public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Hey, hon, what you doing with your phone? Taking pictures?
No, I'm asking it questions.
Like what?
Hey, Bobo, do flowers have best friends?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, follow me. I want to show you something. Look, flowers do have best friends.
Whoa.
Some answers can only be found in nature. Discover the unsearchable. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a trail near you. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Ready for our little forest adventure?
Yes!
So much waiting for me. Yeah, I wanna go outside. I wanna be.
We're here.
Whoa, that was fast.
There's a forest closer than you think. Find a park or forest near you and music inspired by nature at discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by USDA Forest Service and the Ad Council.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Hey, kids and parents, it's back to school time. As you shop for school supplies and get ready for class, make sure you have emergency plans in place. Did you know that emergency preparedness plays a major role in school life? Throughout the year, schools actively prepare for natural disasters, outbreaks, and other emergency situations. Students and parents need to be aware and learn what to do during an emergency. Every family should build an emergency kit, make a family disaster plan, and be informed about events that could affect their community. Parents, take a few extra steps to help children be prepared. Make sure they know the full name, address, and phone numbers of parents or guardians. In our high-tech world of cell phones, memorizing emergency phone numbers is very important. Include a copy of this information in their backpack. Other items to keep in their backpack include water and non-perishable snacks, a pocket-sized first aid kit, a whistle to alert others for help, and a list of allergies, medical conditions, and medications. Make sure their school and teacher have a copy, too. Be familiar with different routes and ways to travel home, like walking, taking the bus, or riding home with another student who lives nearby. Establish a secret code word with your child and whoever takes them home from school to protect against an unauthorized person picking them up. This list is a great starting point to prepare your student for the upcoming school year. Customize these steps to fit your child's capabilities and needs. Ask school administrators and teachers about emergency preparedness plans so you know what steps they are taking to keep your child safe. Many schools have guidelines on how to shelter in place during natural disasters, how to secure classrooms during an emergency lockdown, and how to teach preparedness curriculum to students. Remember, emergency preparedness is important for everyone. Children who are prepared are more confident during stressful emergency situations. By following preparedness guidelines, parents, children, and school staff can improve their safety and peace of mind. For more information on school emergency preparedness, visit cdc.gov/children/schools. To learn more about disasters and emergency preparedness, follow @CDC Emergency on Twitter or visit emergency.cdc.gov. So, let's get prepared. Have a great school year.
For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation
to netrootsradio.com. All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. In Federalist 51, James Madison stated that, in a Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. This statement, and an abundance of other evidence, make it clear that the framers of the Constitution intended Congress to be the dominant branch of the national government. Congress, the branch of government most accessible to the people, was intended to be the voice of the people, whose representatives were given the power to make the laws under which they consented to be governed. This was especially true of the House of Representatives, which was elected directly by the people. Members of the Senate were elected by the people's representatives in the state legislatures until the ratification of the 17th Amendment in 1913, which provided for election of its members by the people. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
An execution in Alabama. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The state put James Barber to death at 3 o'clock in the morning on July 21st, 2 hours after the Supreme Court had denied his petition for a stay. Other relevant facts, in 2022, Alabama had 3 botched executions in a row, where executioners for hours had dug for veins, mangled nerves, and caused excruciating pain. The governor ordered an investigation, and the Department of Corrections that had botched the executions investigated itself. When Barber tried to find out what the investigation had uncovered, the state stonewalled him. The department issued no report, but rather sent the governor a brief letter saying everything was fine and the executions should resume. And they did, after 6 justices without explanation denied the stay. The 3 dissenters, who wanted to pause the potentially barbaric killing, thought the relevant facts should be disclosed and the law on cruel and unusual punishment applied, saying the government had no right to conduct experiments on a human life. After the execution, the state's attorney general claimed justice has been served. The director of Reprieve US, an anti-death penalty group, said, killing a man in the dead of night with extra straps on the gurney to make sure he's held down when writhing in pain and calling that an execution going smoothly goes to show how broken lethal injection is. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. Frank Little, an activist for the Industrial Workers of the World, or Wobblies, was lynched near Butte, Montana. His beaten body was found hung off a railroad trestle. On it was pinned a disturbing note. It read, quote, "Others take notice. First and last warning. 3777 LDCSSWT. The numbers were the measurement of a grave. Each letter was the initial of a union organizer. The letter L for Frank Little was circled. The warning was clear. Union organizers leave town or die. Butte was copper mining country, and efforts to unionize the miners had turned the area into a battleground. Frank had arrived that July to help in the efforts to support striking miners. Frank Little was a leader of the IWW with experience organizing free speech campaigns, lumberjacks, and miners. Although not much is known of his early life, it is thought his mother was Cherokee and his father was a Quaker. He organized the wives of the miners to join in the pickets and helped build solidarity between the multiple unions that organized in the area. The Anaconda Mining Company took note of his presence, but could not find a legal means to stop him. Then, early on that fateful day, men came to his boarding house. They claimed they were police officers. They gagged Little and stuffed him into a car. They beat him and drug him through part of town tied to the car bumper. And it was at the county line where they hung Frank Little's body. News of the atrocities spread far and wide. Thousands attended the funeral. Not surprisingly, the authorities never found his murderers. Some doubt they ever tried. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 61 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the mid-90s. Sunny throughout the day with winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight with lows in the low 60s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Then sunny tomorrow with highs in the low 90s. Winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Grass pollen is rated as moderate here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 42 parts per million. And that daytime UV index is very high at level 8, so take care. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.05 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 72% and drying out more throughout the day. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is why it is the Weather Underground. London is 72 degrees and fair. Paris is 70 degrees and cloudy with a thunderstorm advisory, and they get them there, I gotta tell you, it's scary. Rome is 85 and sunny. Kyiv is 81 degrees and fair. Kabul is 78 and clear. Hong Kong is 83 and fair. Tokyo is 77 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 46 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees, mostly cloudy, with a small craft advisory on the bay for fog. And New York, New York is 76 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. At the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. The U.S. yesterday, Monday, imposed sanctions on 4 ranking Bosnian Serb officials for undermining a 1995 peace agreement that ended a war that left more than 100,000 dead and millions homeless. The 4 officials sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury include Zelica Savinovic, a Serb member of the tripartite collective Bosnian presidency, as well as the prime minister of the Serb entity in Bosnia, Radovan Viskovic. The four are alleged to have taken part in drafting a law that U.S. and other international officials say undermines the unity of Bosnia by ignoring the decisions of the country's constitutional court. The Bosnian Serb parliament has passed a law to not recognize or implement any decisions by Bosnia's multi-ethnic constitutional court. This action threatens the stability, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the hard-won peace underpinned by the Dayton Peace Agreement, said Undersecretary of Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence Brian E. Nelson. This behavior further threatens the country's future trajectory and successful integration into Euro-Atlantic institutions, he summed up. The Bosnian War started in 1992, pitting mostly Muslim Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats against each other. It ended with the U.S.-sponsored Dayton Accords that created two regions, the Republika Srpska and the Bosniak Croat Federation. The Bosnian Serb ruling party, the SNSD, said that the latest U.S. sanctions were shameful and hypocritical and would not stop us from doing our job. The pro-Russian Bosnian Serb leader, Milorad Dodik, has openly been striving to separate Bosnian Serb territories from the rest of Bosnia and join them with neighboring Serbia. Because of that, he was also sanctioned by the U.S. in 2017.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
And even more Associated Press staff brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Kosovo's journalists yesterday, Monday, protested against the government's decision to suspend a private television station's operations. Authorities made the move last week because they said there were irregularities concerning the registration of Clan Kosovo's business license that violated the country's constitution. Scores of journalists and members of civil society organizations gathered in downtown Pristina in front of the main government building to protest the suspension of the broadcaster's operations. The demonstrators said it was politically motivated action taken by the government of Prime Minister Albin Kurti. It was the first closure of a media outlet since the end of Kosovo's 1998-1999 war, they said, holding a banner that read "Democracy Dies in Darkness." Last week, Kosovo's Ministry of Industry and Trade suspended Clan Kosovo's license after the documentation of its business registration in neighboring North Macedonia showed that its owners had named Kosovo's municipalities as if belonging to Serbia, which is a violation of our constitution, according to a statement released yesterday, Monday. The journalist accused the government's decision as an open and unprecedented war against the media, urging owners of Clan Kosovo to continue its legal fight at the court. Editor-in-Chief Gazman Silla called the suspension unfair. "We consider this kind of pressure to stop us doing what we are doing," he told the Associated Press, adding that they would challenge the government's decision in court. Last month, Kosovo's Agency of Business Registration found the alleged fault and decided to suspend the operations of the television station, a move supported last week by the ministry. The station has said it already fixed the problems as requested. Clan Kosovo was launched in 2009 and became the country's biggest private television station. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.